This video should take you the rest of the way through the Chapter 6 notes. Since you already have the PowerPoints uploaded into Schoology and you can get the notes that way, I'm going to go through this pretty fast. You can also pause at any point if you want to. I think that in class prior to the test we had stopped by talking about the anatomy of an osteon and we had labeled the picture that goes along with this. So I think that the next thing that you guys have to do is to define interstitial and circumferential lamella. Definitions are really easy to get, but here's the thing. If you're packing a bunch of circular columns together in a bone, you're going to have spaces between those circles, and you need to fill that in with stuff. And so interstitial lamella are sort of the fill-in-the-blank incomplete lamella that go in between the intact osteons. Then, the other thing to think about is if you just had a bunch of osteons around the sides, your bones would all be bumpy because of the osteon anatomy. And so what we do is we create some lamella that go all the way around the outside surface of the bone. That's what circumferential lamella are. Next up, you have what are the organic components of bone. So these are the proteins that are made by the osteoblasts and the osteocytes. That is primarily going to be collagen fibers, but there's a bunch of other stuff that's organic that's in that matrix, a bunch of other proteins. The cells are also organic components inside of there. So the osteocytes that live inside the lacuna, which are these little black lines that you see here, those cells are also part of the organic components of bone. The osteoid matrix that was organic that I described earlier, again, collagen fibers are going to be a huge part of that, but it's also the ground substance. What's important for you to understand is the organic components of the bone help to make your bones a little bit bendy or flexible. You can actually see this for yourself the next time you eat some sort of like chicken wing or something like that that has a bone in it. You can take the bone and then soak it in vinegar, and what that does is it removes all the inorganic components of bone and it leaves you with just the organic components, and you'll be able to bend the bone just like this. Your bones are ordinarily just the right amount of bendy and just the right amount of hard to not break during the course of everyday life, and that's because you maintain homeostasis between the organic and the inorganic components. So soaking the bone in vinegar removes that hardness and you're just left with the flexibility. What are the inorganic components of bone? This is primarily going to be those minerals. The minerals all add together to make hydroxyapatite salts, which are primarily going to be calcium and phosphate, but there's other minerals in there as well, including magnesium. This is what makes your bones nice and hard, and so this is what allows your bones to take a lot of force during the course of a day and then not break. If your bones are doing good in terms of the inorganic components, but you don't have the organic flexible parts, what happens is your bones tend to shatter and lead to comminuted fractures. Now this is a dog. Hopefully you guys could recognize the fact that this was not a human, but this is a comminuted fracture. There was actually a dog versus car situation, but a lot of elderly people, their bones tend to break into lots of pieces like this because they've lost a lot of the organic components that allowed their bones to be flexible, and so now it just breaks. After that, we start talking a little bit about how bones get made. So ossification is the process that makes bone. You start this while mom is about 2 months pregnant, and you're inside of her, and so you start making the bones then. You're not finished with this process basically ever, especially if you break something, you're going to ossify again. But you are primarily done with the growing part of bone by the time you hit about 25. I showed you this PET scan way early in the semester, and you can see the baby is not done ossification yet. You can see the soft spots that have formed, and that's because they haven't ossified this membrane yet that exists, and so that's why the soft spots develop. Next, you have what is happening during the 4 stages of intramembranous ossification and what type of bone does it form. So it forms flat bones. Intramembranous means inside of a membrane, and membranes are these sheets of tissue. And so if you're making bone inside of a sheet, hopefully you can see that's going to help you make flat bones inside of there. Your book has 4 different pictures, and I'm going to just kind of come to the end. These are the 4 pictures that show you intramembranous ossification. First thing that happens in an embryo is we get an ossification center, which is just a little cluster of osteoblasts that form within the mesenchyme. These cells secrete bone matrix. Once those cells have secreted enough matrix that they end up being trapped inside of it, the name changes. Osteoblasts stay outside. Once they're trapped inside, they become osteocytes. So they're really the exact same cells, it's just that once they're trapped inside the matrix, they're called osteocytes at that point. Next step after we've started trapping some of those cells is we start to make the bone what's called woven. We add a blood supply because all these cells, they need nutrients, they need waste removal, and so that blood supply is going to help bring all of that material and make it available to the osteoblasts and the osteocytes. There are still osteoblasts all over the outside surface, and there's osteocytes inside that this picture isn't showing. So they're still secreting more matrix and making the bone stronger. Last is we have to make the bone actually functionally strong. And so what we're going to do is we're going to make compact bone around the outside and then weave the bone to make spongy bone on the inside. This gives it that nice diploid shape that we're supposed to have in a flat bone. Next, what's happening during endochondral ossification and what kind of bone does it make? So this is what makes the long bones. I'll come to the end picture that shows you the summary. So this still starts at about the second week of embryonic development. We start with a hyaline cartilage model. That's what endochondral means. It means inside cartilage. So we're not going for a sheep this time. We're going for a nice long bone. First thing that happens is we make a bone collar. So what's going to happen when we make that bone collar is it's going to start to choke off the cartilage cells inside of there, and they're going to start to die off. Once the cartilage dies, we can replace what had been cartilage with bone. So it's important that you know you don't just turn cartilage magically into bone. You have to kill the cartilage so that you can add bone to it. After you do that, you can bring in the blood supply, because remember, bone does have a blood supply. The cartilage didn't, and so we have to bring that in. Next up, we're going to start working at the ends of the bones. We are going to leave hyaline cartilage as our epiphyseal plates in the middle there, and so notice the bone is also growing during this stage. So that's endochondral ossification. What are the 4 zones that develop within the epiphyseal plate? Proliferation zone is where mitosis is actively happening. You have a hormone called growth hormone that stimulates this zone so that you make more cells. Hypertrophic zone. Hypertrophy means that you're making cells that you already have bigger, and you can see the cells are growing in that stage. So here you have made a bunch of cells, but they're small. Here they start to actually push themselves longer, and this is why you actually grow, is because as those cells get bigger, they push the epiphyses away from the diaphysis and the bone grows. Now all of this is still hyaline cartilage. So in stage 3 or zone 3, what happens is we start to calcify the cartilage, and that chokes it off from the blood supply, and so the cartilage cells literally start to die in calcification zone. That makes this the weakest part of the epiphyseal plate, and if a kid breaks a bone, this is the most likely place where that's going to happen. After the cartilage has been killed off, we can start ossification, so we can start making bone south of that, and so that's what's happening in the ossification zone. Hormones that play a role in bone growth. I mentioned a second ago, growth hormone is released by the pituitary gland. It stimulates the proliferation zone of the epiphyseal plate so that the bone will get longer. Thyroid hormone sort of sets a blueprint for what your bone shape is supposed to be. If you've ever seen, well, you probably haven't in the United States, but there are people that are born with a deficient thyroid gland, and there are people who don't get enough iodine in their diet, and so their thyroid gland doesn't produce enough thyroid hormone, and their bones always end up being misshapen, because without thyroid hormone, your body doesn't really know what shape those bones are supposed to be. And then last, your sex hormones also help stimulate growth of your bones. Testosterone is a more potent growth hormone, which is why guys tend to be bigger than girls, but estrogen is a growth hormone. It's just not as potent. Next up, how often is bone replaced? Spongy bone gets replaced more often, compact bone less often. Bone deposit lays down more matrix, bone resorption picks it up. Bone remodeling uses both of those 2 steps, and you do this in response to stress in your bones. And so the story that I usually like to give you, like if you were to compare 1980s Arnold Schwarzenegger with early 2000s Arnold Schwarzenegger, his bones were not undergoing the same amount of stress, and it costs your body energy to maintain your bone. And why should you spend all that energy to maintain it if you're not using it and stressing it all that much? So his bones would have had very different, especially like the bone markers like the trochanters and the processes, they would have been smaller here than they were there because of the process of bone remodeling. Now, after this picture was taken, he started working out again because he stopped being the governor and he started going back to movies. And so he did bone remodeling again to increase the strength of his bones. So this is a process that you can do on and off. It just depends on your activity levels, whether or not you're going to be building up or tearing down more often. Which cells are needed for bone remodeling? This picture is not in your book, but it actually shows you everything. And so I would recommend you spend a little bit of time studying this one. But let's say that you have broken a bone. What's going to happen is osteoclasts are going to tear down the area where the break has happened so that you can remove any sharp ends or things like that. Then osteoblasts are going to start the process of laying down bone matrix so that you can build that area back up. Once again, as those osteoblasts get trapped inside their matrix, they become osteocytes, and they help rebuild strength within the bone once you have formed it. So you need all of those cells to help you remodel bone, and they work all the time to help you keep your bones just as strong as you need them to be. Which two hormones specifically control bone remodeling, and what does each one do? These two hormones are really, I mean, they play a role in bone remodeling, don't get me wrong, but their primary function is not about bone strength, it's about your blood calcium levels. You need calcium for your nervous system to function, and you need it for your muscles to contract, and you need it for your blood to clot. You need it for so many very, very important things that your body looks at your bones as more of a calcium storage area. If you have been eating plenty of calcium, what happens is your body releases calcitonin, specifically the thyroid gland releases calcitonin. And calcitonin helps take all that extra calcium that was in your bloodstream and store it into your bones to make your bones nice and strong. It does that to lower your blood calcium level, because if it gets to be too high, you have major problems. But the end result of that is, yay, your bones are stronger. This hormone really only works well when you're a kid. As you get older, it really kind of loses its function. If you have not been getting enough calcium in your diet, the parathyroid glands, which are on the back of the thyroid gland, release parathyroid hormone, and they stimulate osteoclasts to tear down your bones faster. So that's going to make you release calcium from the bones and put it into the bloodstream so you can keep your blood calcium level up. So you maintain your blood calcium level, but you do it to the detriment of your bone, and your bones get weaker over time. These two hormones are very important, because if they don't work correctly, you literally die because you can't maintain your blood calcium hormone, blood calcium level. And so it's very important that you know these. I can pretty much guarantee you a question on a test about these hormones, so pay attention to them. How do bones respond to mechanical stress? The more stress you put on them, the stronger your body is going to make that over time. What we have seen when we send people, astronauts, up to space, especially if they go for an extended period of time, is when they come back down, their bones are actually so weak and their muscles are so weak that they can't actually move as well as they would like to be able to anymore. And so because they're in microgravity and their bones aren't being stressed, their bones do get weaker. The other thing that we have that helps us see this is whenever you look at a bone, the place where it gets the most stress just based on physics is the place that usually has the thickest layer of compact bone. So for the femur, this area right here is where you have the thickest amount of compact bone around the diaphysis, the very top of the diaphysis there. And so the more you stress them, the stronger they will be. If you just sit on your butt all day, every day, your body's not going to spend the energy to make your bones strong. And so you have to get out there and you have to stress them a little bit. What is a fracture? Too much stress on a bone, so it broke. This is also, it gets you some of your steps to repair. And I think I'll have another picture a little bit later on. But immediately after you break a bone, you're going to start to bleed, because remember, bone is vascular. Well, that blood that leaks into the break, it's going to clot and form a hematoma, and that's going to very temporarily, and not very well, but at least a little bit, hold those bone ends together. Then, after that, you add cartilage, a fibrocartilaginous callus, and then you add a bony callus, and then you remodel it afterwards. Generally takes you about 6 to 8 weeks to heal a bone, but it does depend on the bone, how thick that bone was, how much stress gets on it. Usually we're going to tell you to not move around or put a lot of weight on that while it's in the process of healing. This is the picture that your book used to show you everything that I just said. So you form a hematoma because you broke some blood vessels. You add cartilage so that you can glue the bone ends together. You replace the cartilage with bone, and then you remodel it to give it the original shape and make it strong where it needs to be strong. All right. So some terms that come up when it comes to fractures. If you see the word complete, it means the bone broke all the way through. Incomplete, it didn't break all the way through. So this is a broken left humerus, and so this is a complete fracture of the left humerus. This is also a displaced fracture because the two bone ends aren't in alignment. If they were still together, that would be a non-displaced fracture. A green stick fracture only breaks usually one side of the bone and the other side is still okay. This is, yeah, just so you can kind of see. I don't remember. I think this woman fell off a ladder, if I remember correctly. But this is the x-ray of her. This is what is... your book calls a compound fracture. I'm going to come back to that after just a little bit. But you can see her ulna is sticking out. And so she has an open fracture, aka a compound fracture. After that, you have a few different kinds that are going to matter. So comminuted means that you broke the bones into 3 or more pieces. Compression means you smushed the bone. Spiral fracture means you twisted the bone. Epiphyseal fracture means you broke right at the epiphyseal plate. Again, usually in that calcification zone of the epiphyseal plate because you were killing the cartilage and you made it weak in that spot. Depressed fracture means you've pushed something inwards. This happens all the time during CPR or chest compressions. In the old days, they would often get forceps to pull babies out during difficult labors, and so you would get depression fractures of the skull. That's actually not what happened here. Mom had a difficult labor, and she was pushing, but her hip bones were actually too close together, so she basically just kept contracting and pushing the baby's head up against her hip bones, and so Mom kind of caused that. The baby was fine, just in case you were wondering. Green stick, again, breaks on one side, but the other side is okay. This one you're usually only going to see in kids because their bones are extra bendy. Adult bones don't bend that much. Coming back to a difference. So my brother is a paramedic for the city of Austin, and he was apparently taught that a compound fracture means you broke 2 bones at one time, like your tibia and your fibula, or your radius and your ulna. Nurses and doctors, though, are taught that a compound fracture means that you have an open fracture where the bone is sticking out through the skin. So make sure whenever you're talking about these things, you're super clear on what you mean. And so you can say compound or open fracture, or you could say compound, they broke tibia and fibula, and that way everybody knows what you're really talking about, just to avoid any confusion. P.S. This was a trampoline accident, and so the trampoline is the most dangerous toy that you can buy for your kids. ER docs love them because they get lots of visits from kids who have broken bones because they fell off a trampoline. This one, they didn't tell me what happened to this kid aside from it happened in gym class. I really wish that I could show you an x-ray for this one because I would just love to know what's happening here. But this kid must have broken both the radius and the ulna. I really got no idea what's happening. But so they would currently be bleeding into that break. We would want to splint that so that we can get them off to the hospital and get that realigned and nice and happy. But we want to immobilize it so that if there are any bone shards in there, we don't start moving them around and potentially lacerate a major artery or anything like that. So this is a comminuted fracture because we've broken into 3 or more places, and I chose this x-ray because you can see how pins and screws get used. These are screws. And then there's going to be a big metal rod on this side that all of these are attached to help immobilize the humerus as it's in the process of healing. Okay. From there, problems with bones. So osteomalacia and rickets are about the same thing. The difference is rickets you see in kids, osteomalacia you see in adults, but you don't have enough minerals to harden the bone, so they end up bendy. And so on x-ray, you would see there's curves. So this is the femur. There should not be that big a curve in the right femur. You can see all these kids are either knock-kneed or bow-legged, and that's because both their femurs, tibia, and fibula, they're all not strong enough. They're not hard enough to bear the weight of the child, and so the bones end up being malformed. Osteoporosis you usually see in geriatric patients. The bone is being torn down faster than it's being replaced. So it does end up making the bones look porous or holey. That's why it's called osteoporosis. Treatments for this, do weight-bearing exercise. Again, get off your butt, stress your bones, and they will get stronger over time. Make sure you have a diet that is high in calcium, and you need vitamin D to help you absorb that calcium. There are other treatments that I'm giving you off over there, but she is the nice classic example of weight-bearing exercise. If you do this, your bones will stay strong, and you will continue to be able to do things like whatever that pose is called. Paget's we think is a viral disease. What I want you to notice is it doesn't affect all bones equally. Like this person's left femur but right calcaneus are affected. Their left scapula is affected. Their thoracic spine, and then a lot of their skull bones, temporal and parietal, at least in this picture. But the other femur, fine. And so it just makes some bones go crazy, but not all bones. 8 weeks, about 25. Eat right, exercise, stress the bones. I think that pretty much concludes this chapter. I am going to post a quiz for you guys in Schoology. Make sure you take it.